Hey, what's up guys, welcome back to my YouTube channel. Till now we have done all the things like writing our APIs, performing some tests, and now we have also installed our PostgreSQL database. And let's go back to that particular PG admin. So here you can see that, let me just close this tab. So we have this database now, quiz underscore test, which we will use for performing our database tests in our application. And we also created one user which is Dart, this Dart user which have password as Dart, and also it has all the permission to access this quiz test database. So we have granted all the permission as well. Now let's understand what is ORM. So basically we talked about that this has a very good support for ORM, our this Aqueduct framework. So let's talk what is actually ORM. So ORM is basically stands for object relational mapping. So like we can have a different kinds of database, and all of these database have different kind of use cases. So if you talk about SQL, then it is a relational database management system. So we also call it as RDBMS. So this is what we are doing in SQL database. So what actually it means that it stores the data in the form of tables. Okay, so we can have a table. So if you will see here in the quiz test, we have this schema, and in this schema this has some tables. Okay, as of now you can see this table is blank because we don't have anything. So what this table is all about? So this table represents some sort of entity. Okay, like it can be a person, so there will be a person table. It can be a bank account, so it will be a bank account table. It can be like you can say anything like employee, then it will be an employee table. So any kind of entity. Okay, so and this table will consist of some rows. Okay, so every row in a table is like instance of that entity. Okay, so if the table is an entity, then every row is an instance of that entity. Like if we talk about, let's say we have a table person. Okay, then me, like my name is Pawan, and the Pawan is an instance of that entity. So the person can have Pawan, Salman, Abhishek, Joseph, and any name you can take, and all of those persons are actually the instances of that person table. Okay, so what actually happens is in the object oriented framework like this Aqueduct, we have this similar concept. So for when we talk about ORM, then we have a class which represent any kind of entity like person. So we can have a person class, and we will have an object which is an instance of that class. So what ORM do is ORM maps those rows in a database to and from objects in an application. So okay, so in Aqueduct, each database table class pairing is called an entity, and collectively an application entities are called its data model. So now what we will do, so we will go back to our this application, and we will build our first data model. So what we will do, inside this lib folder sorry, here we will make a new package. We will make a new package name model, where we will have a data model. So as I already told you that we will follow an MVC kind of approach. So we will have model and controller. So we don't have a view because we are just making the backend part. We are not dealing with front end yet. Okay, so here we have this model. Now here what I will do, we will have one type of entity. Okay, so which will be question. Okay, so because we are dealing with our quiz application, so our table will be question table. So here I can say a new Dart file where I can say it question .dart. Okay, now so this is what we are creating here, an entity which is a question. Okay, so now what I will do, first of all I will here import our quiz API, and then we will make a class first of all, which is a question class. Okay, and then it before that let's just make underscore question class. Okay, inside this class we will have an index, and then we will have a description of this question. So we can set string description. Okay, Now this index will be our primary key, so we can use an annotation here @manage primary key. Okay, so this will be our primary key. Now we need to make another class. Now we will call it a question class. The previous one was underscore question, this one is question, and it will extend this managed object. Okay, managed object, and now we will need to pass the persistent type here, which is the question, and it will also implement our question. Okay, so now what is happening here? So we have two classes here. First one is this question class and another one is this underscore question class. Okay, so this basically we are declaring a question entity. So so this underscore question class is basically one-to-one mapping to the database table with the same name. So in the database you will have the same table which with the same name, which will be underscore question. Okay, so this is one thing. So it has some properties. First one is the index, second one is the description. Okay, so these will be the columns of that table. Okay, so what will happen when the ORM will fetch the row from this underscore question table? So there will be some instances will be returned of this question, like there will be multiple question which will be returned. Now let me just show you something. Let's just watch this. So this is the example here where you have this question class, okay, underscore question, where you have index and string description. This is the same thing which will be appear in the table, which you can see on the right hand side, this one, where you have an index and description, and there is index 0 which is what, and the index 1 which is how. And we also have this question table on the left hand side for which we have made a class question which is extending this managed object. So basically there will be two classes every time when we declare an entity like this question. So first one is the persistent type and second one is the instance type. So this underscore one is the persistent type that starts with underscore. Okay, so it will have exactly one primary key. Okay, and it will declare all the property for each database column. Okay, and second one is this instance type, which will extend the managed object. Okay, where it will have this underscore question in the generic type. Okay, and it will what it will do, it will implement this persistent type class. Okay, so which means that it will also have the same properties. Okay, so we'll talk about why we are making two classes. Actually, to make this ORM more powerful, we are making this, so it requires understanding of behaviors and everything. So we will, this is just a beginner thing, so right now we don't need to understand them, but you have to make sure that you have two classes every time when you will create a new entity. Okay, so this is done. Now we need to declare this data model in our this API sync.dart. So here we have this quiz API sync class where we are listening to this logger and all. So below this, what we can say, we can define our data model. So we can say variable data model. Okay, here we can say new managed object model dot from current mirror system. Okay, so what actually it means, that this current mirror system is a constructor which will be able to find all the managed objects. So like we have one managed object here, which is this question class. So what it will do, it will find all the managed objects in your application, and it will pass it to this particular instance of the managed data model. Okay, so now we will have the data model ready here. Okay, now we also need to define a context. Okay, so the data model is one component which is necessary, another one is the managed context. Okay, so basically managed context is something which will be our gate to database. Okay, which will help us in connecting to the database. So what we will do, we will make another variable here, managed context, and let's name it context. Okay, or we can name it managed context as well, whatever you want. and below this data model, now we can say context is equal to, okay, we can say new managed context, and now it will take two parameters. One is the data model and second one is the persistent store. So we have the data model which we just defined, but we don't have the persistent store as of now. So for that we need to make that persistent store. So below this data model, now I will make another variable which is the persistent store. Persistent store, let's say. Okay, let me just change the spelling. Okay, now this persistent store is another instance of our this PostgreSQL persistent store from connection info. Now here we need to define our username, password, host, port, database name and everything. So this is basically it will give us the persistent store when we will pass this. So this is a named constructor from connection info. So this PostgreSQL persistent store class will give us detail about our database. So our username, if you remember, is Dart. Our password, if you remember, is also Dart, which we created in the last video. And our host is basically localhost because we are testing it locally as of now. So we can use localhost. Port, if you remember, which is 5432. Okay, when you will install our PostgreSQL, then it will ask you for the port. If I missed that part because I had the existing database already set up. And database name, which if you remember, it was quiz_test. Okay, so this is our persistent store, this is our data model, and we are passing this to this context, and that's it. So this is this will create a context, this context which will connect us to the database, and the database is this this quiz_test, which has a user which is dart, which we have given all the access. Okay, so this is what we need to do. Now what we will do, we have this database ready. Now let's go to controller, and here we have this controller. Now rather than returning these questions as a constant question, what we will do here, we will go to this class, and here what we will say that we want to have a question query. What it will do, it will make a new query. One second, new query. Okay, and here we will pass the question. Okay, so this is our question class, which is the manage object class. Okay, and now what it will do, so this is an instance of this query question, this question query. Okay, so what will actually happen, so if you talk about this question query itself, then what it is doing, it will go to the database. Okay, and now let me just write one more line so that you can understand what actually happening. So here we can say we want the database questions. Okay, and now we can use this question query. Okay, we should use await here, question query, and then we can fetch. Should have a method fetch, so it will give all the queries, and now we can return all the database questions. So now let me just explain what is we are doing. So we created this instance of this query question class, which is this question query. Okay, and now we are executing its fetch method. Okay, so this method, what will it will do, it will fetch every question from the database, because we are using this question manage object class here. And what it will do, and it will return those questions in the form of this list of question, which is this database question. So we have used this where keyword, but you can use also a list of questions. So we could write it as like this. So let's say list of question, and these once again, so these both are the same things. Okay, so as you can see, this is also working. So you can use here variable, or you can use here this list question. So this is what we are doing. So this list is the body object to that particular response. So here in the response we are passing this database questions. Okay, and by default what happens, it already, this aqueduct is smart enough that it will encode this as a list of JSON objects. Okay, so you don't have to worry about encoding it by using a third-party library or something. So this response is basically encodes all of this to a list of JSON objects. Okay, so this is what we did for the get questions. Now we will do the same thing for this get question at index or single question, whatever name you have given to this method, it's all your choice. So here we can say question query, same thing which we did earlier. So new query, now we can say question. Okay, now what we will also perform some cascading here. We can say where index, we will check its index is equal to where equals to. So we have already this predefined many methods are available, you can see, so you can use any of them. So where equal to, and then we will pass the index here. So basically what we are doing, we are checking from the database about this particular index. Okay, now what we will do, after finding that index, now we don't need this particular thing. Okay, let's just remove it. So how we will remove it, let's see. So we have this question query now for that particular index. Now we will say for variable question, now we have a question, how we will use this question query dot fetch 1, because we already have we already know that we will be having only one question with that particular index, so that is why we are using fetch 1. Now we have the question. Now rather than this index and everything, we can just check if question is null. Okay, so if question is null, we will say response not found, and otherwise we can say that we found it. Now we don't need this index as well, we can just pass the question here. Okay, so this is how we will do this stuff. So this query have now two things. One is the all the results which are it is returning, and another one is it is filtering that result on that particular index, and we have this method fetch 1 which will just give us the one single object. Okay, so this is how this filtering can be done with using this where and everything. So you can have other methods as well, like find and everything. So this is how you will write your fetch thing. Okay, we have already set up the database. Now we need to go to our test application. So we are back to our test application. So we will go to this app where this harness app.dart. So if you will see here, we have this this start method where it is making a request control, we making application, it is asking the quiz API saying, it is assigning it a conf port and then configuration file. So we have all of this stuff. So now we also need to write the database schema here. Okay, so we need to create the database schema because this is a test application class. Obviously if you're not doing any testing, then you can directly attach the database, but now what we want to do, we want when we will click on run test, then it should go to database, it will create a database, it should connect with the database, it should create that table and then perform the testing. So what we will do here, we will make a method here. So what we can say here, below this line we can say static, okay, future create database schema. Okay, now we will also take the context here because we will need the context. Now here we will make a builder. So what is that builder, let me just tell you. So we have this new schema dot it should have schema builder dot to schema, where we will pass the store and the target schema. Then what it will give, it will give us the builder. Okay, so this builder will have all the commands which is required to run all the operation for testing. So here in the store we can just pass context dot persistent store because we already have that. Now for target schema we can say new schema dot from from data model should be there, from new schema dot from data model. Okay, so now we need to pass the data model here, so we can again use the context dot data model. Okay, now it will give us the builder. Okay, this builder will have all the commands, so now we need to execute all the commands. So it also takes one more property, which is temporary, so we will make it true. So because this is temporary, because whenever we will perform the testing, only at that time this database will be created, the tables will be created, and as soon as the testing is completed, it will destroy everything. Okay, so now we can say for variable command in builder dot commands, so we will make a loop for all the commands, we will execute this command. So we can say context dot, oh, what is this, we need to write this context, we need to fix it. Okay, so now we can say context dot it should have something like persistent store. Okay, and then we can say execute, and every command we will pass the command here. So, and also let me make it a wait. Okay, so what it will do, for that let's make it async. So what it will do, it will execute every command from this builder. So first one will be like create the database, then it will be like create a table, then create another table, then put some entries there. So all of the commands it will execute. So this is the purpose of this create database schema, and after that we will call it when we will start our application. Then below that we can call await create database schema, and we can pass the context, which we already have. So we don't have that, no we don't have, so we can use this sync dot context. Okay, so basically sync is this where we have the sync. So sync is basically our this quiz API sync. So this is an instance of that class, and from there we can, here we have the sync, so application dot main isolate sync. So from that sync we can get this context, the context which we have already defined here. If you can see, this is the context where we are passing data model and persistent store, and now we are using the same particular thing here in our app.dart, where we have this schema builder. We are using the persistent store and data model, and we are executing some commands. So that is what we need to do. Now we need to write some more things. So now we will go back to our question controller underscore test.dart. Here we have some methods already defined. Okay, now we need to do something else, because we don't have anything in our database, because we connected with our database, but we never defined any table or something like that in our database. So when your application will start, here setup all will be executed. Then after that what you will do, you will make some questions. Okay, so let's make some questions here. This is just for testing purpose. Okay, when we will deal with the real database, then we don't have to do all of this stuff which we are doing in this video. Okay, we just need to connect with the database, that's it. So here we can say we have some questions. Let's say who are you, okay, what's your name. So again these are not like a quiz questions, these are just general questions, but again these are just for example purposes. Okay, now rather than this, now this is how you will write questions. Okay, we used to write this question, and now we will change it a little bit because we have a data model now. So let me just copy this, and now we will say new question. Okay, because we already have a question class, and we can import that. And now after that we can say dot dot description. So here in the description we can write who are you. Okay, and similarly we will do this same thing for another question. It will also have some description, and here we can say how are you. Okay, fine. Now this is how you will write your question. Now after writing your question in the app.start, we also need to insert these questions. Okay, so that will run all the commands here for this execution of connecting with the database and everything, and it will create the table as well, but it will not insert the data because it does not have the data. So now here we need to add some data. So we can say future dot for each, okay, elements. We will pass the elements, which is our questions. Now we need to perform some action here. So what we will do, we will perform some actions, and 1 second, it will pass the question here, and then we can say, why this is giving me error. It should work. Okay, so this should not be here, right? Okay, so what we will do, for each question we will insert it. So we can say query, and now we can make another query question. If you remember, to access the database we use this thing, okay, and here we can say dot dot values is equal to q. So these are the values we are assigning to this question, because and now what we will do, we will return this query dot insert. So now it has this method insert where we are inserting this. So now we have the value set to q for this particular query, and now we are inserting it into our database. Now let's try to run our tests and let's see what happens. And we actually haven't put any data, but let's run our tests, and you can see so basically something wrong has happened. We have missed something, maybe probably we have some errors first of all, so we need to fix them all. So let's see what we did wrong. Let's paste it here maybe. Okay, 1 second. Okay, this is where. Okay, so now we are fine. Now let's run and let's see what happens. And now we can see our two tests are passed. That is our single question test for both of the for success and failure as well, but this get all question is failed. Let's see what actually happened. So it is saying the body differs for following reasons. First, index is 1, description who are you, which index 1 description who are you, not a string at index 0. So what does this mean? So right now our test is currently verifying that the response body contains a list of JSON string that all ends with this question mark, right? Now let's do one thing. So now that we are returning a list of JSON objects that represent a question, each question has the following form, which is this index 1 and this description who are you. Okay, now what is actually happening, that we need to update our test, because what is happening that this is not able to understand this description stuff. Okay, because we have said that please check here if it has the length greater than 0 and every element ends with question mark, but right now our question have two different parameters inside that. One is the index and second one is the description, so it is not able to understand for which every element I am talking about, because it has many elements, okay, and elements inside elements. So that is the problem. So what we will do now, we will change it a little bit. So inside every element we will say contains pair. Okay, what it will do, we can specify the key here and then we will use this value here. So let's just cut it here from here and paste it here, and the key would be description. Okay, now if I will run this all the tests, then they should work. Yeah, so all the tests are passed now, because we were not testing it for the description. So now we can use this contains pair where we can specify the key for which we want to check if it ends with question mark or not. Okay, so this is how we will do it. Now similarly we can also do it for this slash question slash one, because if we want to specify any body here, then it will not work if we do the earlier stuff. So that is all with us. So it's totally your choice if you want to insert the body part here. Otherwise, if you don't, then you can test it like this. Okay, so this is, I guess, everything which we need to do. There is nothing else we are lefting. So we can also, we can also make another test here, let's say for filtration, because I don't want to skip anything because we are learning this basic stuff. So let's say if someone wants to fetch whether this question includes something. So let's say who are you, how are you, let's say I append my name Pawan. Okay, now let's go back to our question controller and let's create one more method here. Okay, so now it will not have index, it will have the question slash question, but it will have a filter property which will contains. Okay, so let me do one thing here. In the get questions, I can also pass an optional parameter. So I can use this curly braces and here I can say http query. Okay, so whenever, like, let's say if you want to make a request here slash question, then you can also pass some parameters in the get request. So those are called query. Okay, so let's say I can use a question mark and here I can pass, let's say contains is equal to Pawan. Okay, so right as of now it will give me some kind of error because it does not contains anything, but I don't know why it is even working, but this is how it works actually. So this is actually let me just remove this one because it is fetching that much part. And now if you see URI parameter is wrong type, so it should work. Let's say, let me just do one more thing. Okay, so it is not understanding whether the anything extra apart from that is not, it is not able to understand. So but how this query parameter is works, let's say whatever your URL is, you use this question mark and then you pass the query. So we can also do this by using this http query, where you will pass the query itself. So here you can say contains is the query, let's say. Okay, and then you will pass what is that particular string. So contains string, you can say. Okay, now we can also check when we are fetching this database query. Okay, this question query dot fetch. Before that we can check if that contains string is not null. So if that contains string is not equal to null, which means someone has definitely passed some context. Okay, this contains. Okay, now what we can do, we can check this question query dot where dot description. So if that description, so here we have this another method where contains string. Now we can pass the contains string here. So what it will do, it will also append this particular property. It will also check for this particular property that whether this description, any of the question have this description containing this contains string. Okay, then it will fetch all the results. So as you can see, if I will do just right now this particular thing, then it is returning me all the three names, but I don't know, I don't want all the three. So let me just do one thing, let me just restart the server, because as of now let's also append here Pawan. Okay, now it is same as our okay, let me just fix it little bit. How are you? Okay, so this is now let me just remove this one as well. So now this is similar to our test questions, who are you and how are you Pawan. And here you can see we have the same question, who are you and how are you Pawan. Now let's run this server again. Now you can see if I refresh it, then it is saying that relation query does not, because it will not work as of now, because we have some database connectivity, but our API will not work. Our test API will definitely work. So now what we will do, if I will just run this test, then everything will work. But actually we are checking for get all questions, we are not checking for contains string. So if I will change here something, and let's say if I write here contains equal to Pawan, now let's run this test, that particular test only. So let's run this, and this time also it processed, because it is ending with this particular question mark and also responding with 200. So this is not how you will understand why this is working, but we can write a method for this as well. So what we will do, we will just copy all of this code, let's say this, and now paste it here, and now we can remove this particular portion. Okay, and now here we can say contains equal to Pawan, and we will also check if the description is not ends with, but we can check, let's say rather than, let's remove all this part from here, wait a second. Okay, so in the body what we will do now, we will check if we have the index, okay, and the question as well. So we can check like this, we will see if the index is greater than 0 and the description should be same thing, the how are you Pawan, okay, then only this test should pass. Okay, so what we have done, we have another test here, get all question which contains. Okay, and what is happening, we are passing the here the URL as /question contains Pawan, and it will only be successful if we are getting the index as greater than 0 and description as how are you Pawan, otherwise it won't be successful. So let's run this test now, and you can see it passed. Okay, now let me just change from contains Pawan to contains, let's say Ravi. Then if I will run this test, it should fail because we don't have anything named Ravi, so it failed. So you can see here the body differs from the following reason: shorter than expected at location 0, and this is saying that the how are you Pawan, somehow it didn't match because body is differ. Okay, so this is how you can make sure how to write the query thing. Okay, let me just make it to Pawan again, and now let's run all the tests, and now all the tests should pass. So we are done. Okay, so this is how you can, if you want, you can write your this HTTP query for this get method. And for post we use body, so we don't have to worry about that. So similarly you can use HTTP headers as well and similar thing. So this is what about this database queries. This is how you will do all the database part. But as of now, if you will run our these queries, then this will not work because our database is set up only for testing part, not for this API part. So we have tested it properly. Now we can move to real database and we can test it with the database, because we know for 100% that our application will work because we have already performed all the test cases. So that is why testing is important. So in the next video we will also talk about how to make joins and relationships between this data model. So we will talk about that, and then we will execute it on a real database. So that's it guys, thank you so much, bye bye, and I'll see you in the next video. If you enjoyed, then like the video, press the bell icon, and also subscribe to the channel.